from Luke's Gospel, found in the 8th chapter and verses 26 through 39. And I will invite you to read along as Felicia gets her seat. I don't want her to miss a word. Then Jesus and the disciples arrived at the country of the Gerasenes, which is opposite Galilee. As he stepped out on land, a man of the city who had demons met him. For a long time he had worn no clothes, and he did not live in a house, but in the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he fell down before him and shouted at the top of his voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, you Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not taunt me." For Jesus had commanded the unclean spirits to come out of the man. For many times it had seized him. He was kept under guard, bound with chains and shackles. But he would break the bonds and be driven by the demons into the wilds. Jesus then asked him, "What is your name?" He said, "Legion," for many demons have entered him. And they begged him not to order them to go back into the abyss. Now, there on a hillside, a large herd of swine was feeding. And the demons begged Jesus to let him enter these. So Jesus gave them permission. And then the demons came out of the man and entered the swine, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and was drowned. When the swineherds saw what had happened, they ran off and they told it in the city and the country. And then people came out to see what had happened. And when they came to Jesus, they found the man with whom the demons had gone sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind. And they were afraid. Those who had seen it told them how the one who had been possessed by demons had been healed. And then all of the people of the surrounding country of the Gerasenes asked Jesus to lead them, for they were seized with great fear. So Jesus got into the boat and returned. The man from whom the demons had gone begged that he might be with him. But Jesus sent him away, saying, "Return to your home and declare how much God has done for you." So the man went away, proclaiming throughout the city how much Jesus had done for him. We give thanks for this word tonight and the message that will follow. And we pray that we might take it on and live it out. Amen.
Amen. how we measure greatness is something that when you think about it in worldly terms, is usually the byproduct of when we have experiences or we come to awarenesses of things that have pushed us beyond what we thought were the boundaries, whether it be in the running of a race, or whether it be in the development of a response to a social or technological, or maybe even a biomedical problem. There's a way in which we found ourselves where we are at any given time, thinking that what we have at our disposal that we use to solve certain problems and answer certain questions is what we would refer to as being the state of the art and perhaps the best that we imagine it could be. But I always appreciate the fact that you don't have to stay around too long before you realize that whatever it is that seemed to be that which is greater than we could ever have imagined that's going on at any given moment, at any given time, if you just stick around for a while, there's a way in which that thing will be surpassed, and then there will be accomplishments that reach beyond what we thought were possible. I think one of the things that is very helpful to all of us as we consider the possibilities in life is always to make sure that God is a part of our equation. Because the God factor is that which truly translates into what is the real and the foundational and the authentic greatness that can exist around us. Whenever we think about what the possibilities might be, I just pray that we would all learn to make sure that we consider the fact that when it's in the Lord's hands and that when God is clearly a part of that which we are dealing with, we should never think in any way that has limitation to it. Because God has a way of taking us beyond the scope and the boundaries of anything that we can think. I was saying to some people the other day that of all the things that I struggle with sometimes when I read Paul, I do like the way in which he does something that my wife often accuses me of, and that is exaggeration and hyperbole. Just always seemingly saying that things are bigger, better, greater than ever before. But I like that line when Paul says and talks about things being exceedingly abundantly above all that you could ever ask for or imagine. That's the kind of God we serve. And because we serve that kind of God, we can say how great thou art. We can't even begin to imagine that which God is doing and can do. So Jesus and the disciples arrived in the country of the Gerasenes. And just as Jesus stepped on land, the text says, a man of the city who had demons met him. A man from the city who had demons met him. Dealing with our demons. Dealing with our demons. Sometimes we find ourselves wanting to think, liking to think, trying to think that somehow we are not those who in any way are guilty or find ourselves having to deal with the reality of demons in our lives. But I think that what the text that we have today would tell us is that there are certain environments, there are certain circumstances, there are certain social realities, there are certain environmental factors that lend itself to a kind of a context where demons end up being a part of one's life experience. And sometimes it's not necessarily because of anything that we have to or can see or understand in terms of what we necessarily are doing, but it's the way in which the forces of life are impacting us, the way in which we find ourselves dealing with a reality that makes it all but impossible not to end up dealing with demons in a way that sometimes are greater than we can even begin to count or imagine. This man says, when the question is asked, the name, he says that it's legion, that it's, I like the modern translations that say it's like a mob. It's like I am under attack. It's like there is something that is raging against me within me. And I find myself having to figure out how I'm going to deal with that. For Jesus and the time in which he lived, clearly Jesus, being a Jew, put him in a social situation, put him in the midst of a cultural experience that caused Jesus to have to deal with all of that which the people who were a part of his kid were subjected to as a result of living under the umbrella and living under the oppressive forces of the Roman Empire. I know this is something that we often bring as a point of consideration in terms of what it is that's transpiring in the various stories that we read, that we have the accounts of in our text. But there's a way in which I would suggest to you, you can't begin to really tell the story and ignore or dismiss or deny those things which are going on around the people of God who are part of the story that's being told. You see, there's a way in which we get to where even in our modern lives, we like to find ways to sidestep, skirt, and not deal with the environmental realities that we have to face every day as we move through our communities and up and down the streets of life. I'm intrigued by the fact that there are those who are now telling the story of Nashville in a way that makes it one of the most attractive places for you to live in these United States of America. There are even those now who are putting Nashville in the ranks of global cities as ideal places for people to live. But I think any one of us would find ourselves having at least some concern as to whether or not the assessment included all that we see and all that we know as we walk through life each and every day. For indeed, for many of us, the work that we do, and for many of us, the circumstances under which we live out our lives every day, for some of us, the environments of our experience, it's here all around us, but yet there's a way in which there are things that are glossed over, and there are things that just simply are not dealt with forthright. But I would suggest to you that it was as inescapable for Jesus and those who were a part of this community to be somehow oblivious to what was going on in the society around them, as it is for us to be able to dismiss the fact that there are horrors that are being visited upon us and the people who we share life with every day, that create tensions, that create pressures, that create anxieties, and that create fears at a level that go beyond that which is organic. You see, sometimes when we think about things that represent crises and problems for us in life, we deal with that which we can easily objectify, that which we can easily see in reasonable and rational terms. It's easy to take the analysis, which I even end up being very guilty of doing, and saying that the demons end up being in the fact that there is insufficient economic opportunity. We might end up making the assessment that there's a way in which there is not adequate opportunity for people to use the gifts that they have within in order to be able to become productive parts of the society. The education system ends up failing us. The political process, you know, you've heard me do that analysis and you've done it yourself. As a matter of fact, it often ends up being table talk. It ends up being workplace conversation. It ends up being the kind of things that we are dealing with all the time when we talk to our friends and our neighbors about the things that are going on around us. But I would suggest that probably what's worse than that which we see on that level is the way in which it creates for many what becomes an internalized anxiety, an internalized fear, an internalized sense of uncertainty as to what indeed might be viable, what might be possible, and what might be attainable and achievable in the world and the time in which we live. As a matter of fact, we in many instances have already determined that there are factors that are at work around us that are of such magnitude and are of such significance and represent such power that we'll never be able to overcome them. I want to suggest to you this man who is talked about and referred to here as being one who is possessed by demons. I want you to think about him in a different way. I want you to think about him as a person who lives in our community who ends up being politically astute, a person who ends up living in a community where he is analytically gifted in terms of the way in which he's seeing, assessing, and having to witness that which is going on all around. I want you to think about a man who lives in a community where perhaps even the place where he should be able to go and find some peace and find some comfort and some solace in terms of perhaps the faith tradition or perhaps the community that's around him, discovering the fact that even when you go to those places, when you go to the synagogue, when you go to the church, when you go to the places where you're supposed to go, that the contradictions follow you even there. Think about a person who probably has to live every day knowing that all of the people that he loves, that all of the things that he cherishes at any given moment can literally be snuffed out. And in many instances be snuffed out in a way where there will be no justice, where there will be no recourse, and there will be no action taken in relation to. I want to think about this man. See, I think we give this man a bad rap sometimes, honey. I know that I remember asking my good friend when Cynthia Graham was there. I asked Cynthia one day, because I don't know about you now, you know, maybe, you know, I might want to cut the camera off before I say this.
Too late.
But is it not working?
No, go for
it. Let me just say to you, you see, we walk through life sometimes knowing that we are walking on the edge. We walk through life sometimes where, you know, it's an unbelievable price to pay to be conscious and to be aware of the horrors that are going on around you in a way where you find yourself being perpetually bombarded by them. I asked Cynthia one day, I said, Cynthia, do you know when you're at the point when you get ready to flip to the other side? You know, Cynthia's a psychiatrist. I said, do you know when you really lost it? And maybe you end up being one who begins to reflect a kind of behavior that puts you in a place where people see you as somehow being no longer stable in terms of your mind. I mean, you know, what happens when you lose your mind? That's what I was asking her. You know, do you know when it's coming? And one of the things that she said, I remember, and this is not in all detail, is that you don't necessarily know, but you do know when there are things that are compounding, when there are things. I want to suggest to you, this man that we call the Gerasene demoniac is somebody who might just have gotten fed up. Fed up in a way where he saw no need to conform to any of the standards of the world that was around him. He saw no need necessarily to put on clothes anymore. He saw no need to try to accommodate those who have established some pattern of behavior for him. I don't know, but I've had some friends in my life who just decided to check out. And maybe it wasn't a decision. Maybe they were finally pushed over the edge. I want you to think about that, and then think about this man, and then think about the demons. You see, because the reason why sometimes we think we don't have demons is because we have figured out how to be unconscious in terms of that which is transpiring and going on around us. I'm not sure how you live in the world today. I've told you many times, I'm convinced that's what Jesus was talking about when he says, blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted in the Beatitudes. Because I'm convinced that much of what Jesus is saying is that blessed are those who walk through every day in life and find themselves being grieved about what they see going all around them. When you think about Jesus and the people that he addresses, think about that community that represented the untouchables who were dealing with the diseases of Jesus' day, that people would stigmatize them and put them in places and spaces. Think about what it meant to walk through life every day and to see those who are hopeless and helpless, those who are begging, and those who had been like the man by the pool at Bethesda, more than decades adding up in terms of what's going on. What happens when you walk through life? Do you walk through life every day and just find yourself being somehow not touched by what we see around us? All right. I'm just talking about how this man maybe ended up where he was. He might have ended up being one whose demons became, because you see, what happens when those demons come in is that they leave the door open. They leave the door open, and when they leave the door open, those things which represent our demons begin to be compounded. But when Jesus steps into the land, the first thing that is so important is that we talked about this on Wednesday night, is that the man doesn't ask Jesus for help. It's clear that what happens before the voice of the man who's possessed by the demons comes into the story is that Jesus has already spoken. Jesus recognized something. Jesus was aware. Jesus had the gift of discernment that allowed him to be able to see this man's condition. And because he saw the man's condition, and maybe Jesus saw that he was about to go over the edge, maybe that's why Jesus spoke to the demon and began to call the demons out. This man had come to where perhaps he thought the demons were beyond what could be dealt with by anybody or anything. Yeah. Because it's clear that when Jesus spoke and the demon began to somehow respond, the man says, you know, don't torment me in this way. Don't torment me. That means that sometimes what has happened to us is that we have come to a place where our demons so hold sway in our lives, we don't know what to do. Let me see if I can talk about what some of the demons end up being that maybe are not right. You know, we get demons in our mind and we want to see gory creatures and we want to see, you know, scary figures and all this kind of thing. I want to suggest that the demons that are perhaps worse than any are, one, the demon of fear. When you live in a perpetual state of fear, there's a way in which one's existence ends up being defined by that which is governed, and that which is being governed by a sense of uncertainty and a lack of assurance in life every day. Sonny made reference to the trial that's starting in Florida tomorrow. But what is it like to be a parent who has to be concerned every time your child leaves the house that they might not come back? And to also have the further sense of fear. Not only are there not forces out there that are in the business of securing and protecting, but also having to deal with the fact of that when things do happen, that there's no way in which justice would be served. What happens when you start to believe that life and that which you treasure can be snuffed out, and you find yourself not being able to do anything about it? It's a destabilizing moment. I want to suggest to you that the demon that does the greatest damage to most of us all the time is fear. Because there's a way in which our fears end up being the things that haunt us. Our fears end up being the things that will literally eat us up from within because of our inability. They've even done polls that have tried to figure out what are the issues that people are most concerned about. They do it all the time in election seasons. And one of the things they talk about is fear and safety and security as being the biggest issues that folks deal with all the time. I want to suggest to you that the demon of fear, if you notice the title of the sermon is dealing with our demons, because I'm convinced we do have them. The second thing, in terms of the ways in which the demons will manifest themselves, is we have to be a people who are willing to acknowledge the ways in which we end up being a part of what perpetuates the contradictions in our lives. I think in many instances, we realize that when we accommodate, that when we compromise, and that when we allow ourselves to become a part of it. It reminds me of that line from Frederick Douglass where he says that no one can enslave you without your cooperation. And there are ways in which the contradictions end up. So now I just want to suggest to you that this man perhaps has become so captured by the fear and by the contradictions that he doesn't know what to do. And then the other thing that happens is when we find ourselves knowing that what we end up doing in response to that which represents the true demons in our lives translates into a kind of personal hypocrisy that we will participate in because of our lack of willingness to deal with the truth about who we are. Let me show you how it works. It works when you find yourself looking at others and always saying that it's because of who they are that we have the problems that we have, without saying anything about how we end up being a part of what perpetuates and carries the problem forward. We end up knowing that the things that we don't speak to and the things that we internalize end up being as much a part of what's creating the problems around us as anything else. And then we find ourselves always wanting to point the finger at others, and the demons come in when that spirit of judgment begins to go out. The demons come in when we find ourselves trying not to associate ourselves with what's transpiring around us. God is saying to us today that we have a lot of demons that we have to address. But the things that I'm going to answer in this text, dealing with our demons begins first by recognizing that the Lord is always with us. That the Lord is always with us. Like I said, the man did not ask Jesus to do anything, but Jesus acted. And I'm convinced sometimes Jesus is acting and Jesus is intervening, and we are resisting even seeing that which the Lord would have us to see. The first thing is to realize that Jesus acted. The other thing is for us to just let go and let God, to some degree, have God's way. Because I do believe that there is that energy within the universe, which is a positive energy, an energy which I think, and I just heard Jim Lawson earlier today in a eulogy talk about it in terms of the power of love, which somehow is always resonating within us, but yet we are not allowing ourselves to bring it forth in a fashion that gets us beyond the contradictions and the ways in which we try to avoid and escape the truth of life that's going on around us. And then I think the other thing we have to do is to maintain our progression in terms of moving in the right direction to overcome the control that the demons have over our lives. You see, a part of what helps us to be free is to give witness to the ways in which the Lord can liberate us. Because if we can say today that we have found our freedom in our relationship to the Lord, I would have to say that freedom comes with responsibility. The story says at the end that this man wanted to just go on with Jesus. But Jesus says, no, you go back home. You go back to that community. You go back to the people. You go back to the place. And when you get there, tell the truth about what you know as a result of how you've been freed and how you've been liberated from the demons that have control of your life. Go back and be honest enough to call the demons by name, knowing that when you call them by name, it's not necessarily going to put you at the top of the chart in the hit parade in the popularity contest of life. Go back and call them by name and understand that when you do, that the powers that are property and the powers that are continually maintaining their hold of control will be challenged by what you have to say. Go back and tell the demon, call it out, identify it. Because in too many instances, what allows the demons to continue to rage and have their way in our lives is our lack of willingness to open our mouths and say, this is what the problem really is. This is what the problem really is. And when we deal with it forthrightly, it's going to challenge us to do some things differently than we've done them in the past. I haven't decided yet, Sunday, what I want to say about the pigs. But I'm convinced that I had a way I was going to talk about it, and Sunday made me think about it in a different fashion. But I will tell you, though, that I do think that demons only have a life when they can find something to attach themselves to. They only have a life when they find something to attach themselves to. And one of the things that we have to be careful of is not allowing ourselves to become those things and those people that the demons in our world attach themselves to. The demons attach themselves to us when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable to the insanity of the kind of greed and consumerism that's commonplace in our society. I'm convinced the demons attach themselves to us when we allow ourselves to determine that there are some people that we can discount, dismiss, and write off because of some aspect of their personhood that we have accepted and agreed is outside of the bounds of that which we want to deal with in life. We end up allowing ourselves to be a part of the place where the demons can find a home when our attitudes of prejudice and bias and bigotry are allowed to grow and to fester in our heads and in our hearts. We end up becoming a place that accommodates the demons when we decide that we will somehow separate ourselves from the they, the them, and the those that we have decided are out of bounds in a way that we cannot ever accept or deal with. If we accept the love ethic of God, there are no exceptions. And there's a way in which we have to be willing to embrace everyone in a spirit of love that allows there to be nothing that separates us from them. Because we are who they are, and they are who we are, because of the God who is the creator of us all. We've got to deal with the demons in our lives. And when we do, we'll throw off the shackles, and we will be set free. Yeah.